feel like if it's been this good so far, it can kind of only get better from here. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am going to talk to you about some of the books that I loved before I was on BookTube, before I was a book blogger, before I had a book Instagram. Basically, these are all of the books that I loved back before I was even on the internet. There are 8 books that I'm going to talk to you about today, and I think some of them are a little bit underneath the radar. So it's time to find out your new favorite read. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is Kevin Brooks's Candy. My mom's going to kill me. This was one of my favorite books when I was a teenager. And I think part of the reason for that is because of the subject matter. And it was something that I had never really read about before. It was something that I wasn't very familiar with. It's about a boy who falls in love with a teenage prostitute. So it's about Joe, and he lives in London, and he is going to the doctor's one evening because he's got a growth on his hand, I think. He meets a girl called Candy, and they fall in love, and they kind of travel around London together, and they meet up every now and then. And then it turns out that Candy is a teenage prostitute, that she is addicted to heroin, and that she is owned by a pimp called Iggy. And Iggy very much wants to keep Joe out of Candy's life because he needs the money. So Joe and Candy kind of disappear one evening, and they disappear to a cottage that I think Joe's family owns somewhere up the country. And Iggy finds out and kidnaps Joe's sister as a kind of a ransom note. And okay, it is a kind of a bleak book, but I was hooked on it. And I know that that's the wrong word to use, but I absolutely adored that book. I think I ate it up in like a day, and I have reread it twice since. I haven't reread it in a really, really long time, and I'm definitely going to read it either this or next year. But oh my god, I love that book so much. And nobody talks about it. If you've read it, please talk about it with me. The second book really kind of needs no introduction. It's like the opposite of Candy. If nobody talks about Candy, then everybody is talking about Matilda by Roald Dahl. I don't even think that I need to explain what Matilda by Roald Dahl is about. It's about a young girl who is obsessed with books. She has read Charles Dickens by the age of 4. Her parents are really neglectful. Her brother is an asshole. She goes to a school. Her principal's a dick. Her teacher is actually really, really nice. Ends up adopting her at the end of the book. It's one of the best books that I've read in a really long time. And again, I haven't reread it in ages, but I definitely need to get around to it again. One book that I have reread recently is Always the Bridesmaid by Sarah Webb. And this book is kind of the first adult-themed book that I read. I think I was maybe 11 or 12 by the time I first read it. So it's about a woman called Amy, and her baby sister Susie is 24, and she has just come back from Australia where she's done her gap year. And she met a man out there called Matt, and she comes back and she's got an engagement ring on. And Amy is starting to feel really jealous because she's 30, she isn't in a relationship. She's actually just split up with her long-term boyfriend recently. And it turns out that her long-term boyfriend and one of her best friends have started hooking up, and they get engaged. And then one of Amy's other friends gets engaged, and Amy is the bridesmaid for 2 of these weddings. Surprisingly, not the one of her ex-boyfriend. Can't really think why that would be. She's kind of starting to realise that this is the time that she can kind of grab life by the balls for herself. And what she really wants to do is become a children's presenter. So she wants to be a children's presenter on like a kids' TV show that used to be in Ireland back in the 90s and noughties. It was called The Den. And they did like continuity announcements for stuff that was coming up, but they also did little kind of skits, and they had puppets as presenters. You might have heard of Dustin the Turkey recently. That was one of them. Amy is also working in a bookshop, and she meets an author there, and his name is Steve, and they get on really well together. There is a scene in Rome, which I thought was really cute. Beth, one of Amy's best friends, takes her away to Rome for her birthday, which I thought was really nice. And there's also a couple of scenes at hen parties, which is where I first learned what condoms are when I was like 12. I think it's a really great book. I had read it recently, and there were some things that kind of stuck out because back when I was younger, I didn't really think that a 17-year-old and a 27-year-old together was creepy as hell. So that aside, did really enjoy this book. I haven't reread this book, but I have got another one of the author's books somewhere back there. And the book in question is Forget by Ruth Gilligan. It is her debut novel. It's a teen novel, and it's set in Dublin in 2004. I think that's the year it was written. So it follows Eva, who has recently lost her dad, and she's gone back to school after this loss, and it's kind of about how she's coming to terms with it, how she is moving on from his death and kind of getting on with her life as it has changed now. and all of the different relationships that she's going through now. And she also falls in love with a guy called Zach, who also goes to her school, but he's much more of an outsider. He's a guitar player, whereas all of Eva's friends would be rugby players. And I really, really liked the connection that Eva and Zach had at the end of this novel. It's such a lovely novel, and it's a really, really well written one. Also, it's quite different to the books that Ruth writes at the moment, which are a lot more literary fiction. So this might be a good place for you to start if you're looking for one of her earlier books. I was a big fan of series when I was in my teenage years. I loved the Angel Academy series. I loved the Princess Diaries series. And I absolutely adored Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging by Louise Renison. I absolutely adored the Angel Academy series. I loved the Princess Diaries series. And I was absolutely obsessed with the Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging series by Louise Renison, who sadly passed away in 2016. This is one book that I would absolutely love, Where Are You Now? And I know that we're not going to get it, but I would absolutely love to see what Georgia is doing at the moment. I just know that wherever she is in the world, she is causing so much chaos. So Georgia is like 16, 15 years old. I think she starts out the novels as 14 and maybe goes through like 15 or 16 by the end of it. And it's about her and her very tight group of friends, who is Jazz and Rosie and... oh, there's so many other of them. I think there's an Erin. Georgia and her friends go to Stalag 14, which I am assuming is some kind of school that may teach in German in England. And she is basically the most awkward person you will ever meet. This series is full of just OTPs. I absolutely ship Georgia and Dave to the end of this world, and also Rosie and Sven to the end of this world. And it also gave me the snogging skill, which I learned meticulously when I was in my teenage years and have somehow now forgotten because I haven't read the books in so long. This is a book that I can actually remember from when I was in school. And I don't mean secondary school, I mean I was like 10 when we read this in school. It was The Hiring Fair by Elizabeth O'Hara. So it follows Sally, who's a 13-year-old, and she lives in, I think, Donegal. So Sally and her sister Katie are sent off to be kind of scullery maids at really well-to-do houses when their father dies in an accident, and they have to kind of send back money so that their family can survive. It was a really, really great way of seeing what Ireland was like for somebody who was my age when I was reading these books, about 100 years before I was even born. It was a really great way of bringing a history of Ireland into my life as a 10-year-old, way at the other end of the country. I just loved seeing Ireland's history brought to life in such a way. It was a really great book for me to read. And so the final book that I loved before I had any kind of bookish life on the internet is Where Rainbows End by Cecilia Ahern. And this is also known as Love, Rosie, as a kind of a tie-in to the film version. The film version isn't great, by the way. So I reread this as an audiobook maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and that kind of ruined it for me because the audiobook narrators, their accents were just so awful. They were like the Tom Cruise Far and Away accents, but worse. But this book is told in an epistolary way, so it's told in the form of diary entries, it's told in the form of letters, emails, phone calls, texts, all that kind of thing. It doesn't have like a prose until you get to like the epilogue right at the end of the book. And it follows Alex and Rosie, who are two best friends, and they've grown up really, really close together. And they both have really great ideas for their future. Alex wants to be a doctor, whereas Rosie really wants to run her own hotel. And when you finish school in Ireland, you have a final dance called the Debs, and everybody dresses up and everybody goes to it, and it's a really great night. And Alex misses the Debs, and he was meant to go with Rosie. So she brings somebody else and then ends up pregnant, and her life completely derails. She goes in a completely different direction than she was aiming for. And it's about their lives as they kind of come together and miss each other, and they still keep in touch after all of these years, which is such a really nice thing to see. And you spend the whole book waiting for them to just get the hell together. When you're finished, I will continue. So those are all of the books that I have loved before I had any kind of a life on the internet in regards to books. What books have you really enjoyed before you had a book blog or a booktube or a bookstagram or any kind of a book life? Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now get on out of here.